three main areas that we're going to concentrate just the initial presentation are these. One, the types of headache that we face most commonly when people talk about having headache near the holidays. Two, the potential risk factors for those headaches and what actually sets them off. And we'll do some specific information on alcohol. And then finally, some possible solutions, what we can tell our patients to do at this time of year to perhaps prevent or alleviate the headaches that they're experiencing. So first, the types of headaches. We in the headache world, organize headaches into an assortment of families, 13 families. And this is the most recent classification scheme developed or released last year. And families 1 through 4 are what we call primary headaches, where headache is the problem. Secondary headaches on the right side of the screen is a situation, a secondary headache is a situation where the headache is the symptom of another problem. So on the left, you have patients who have migraine or tension headache because that's what their brains do. On the right, you have patients who have a headache because it's a symptom of the flu or a head injury or a stroke or perhaps caffeine withdrawal. So any one of a number of things can cause headaches. So when we refer to headaches at this time of year, our first job is to classify them and put them in a category. So we can see either a person who has a headache problem get more, so activation of a primary headache can occur at this time of year. People who have migraines or have tension-type headaches have more of them. Or we can see the development of a secondary headache in somebody who's not particularly headache-prone. Probably a good example of that is a hangover headache, where patients who are not headache sufferers, by and large, will experience headache at this time of year because they have too much alcohol. Viral infection is another common cause of headache at this time of year. Patients who develop cold or flu symptoms, headache very commonly in a part of that complex. And then finally, depression. This is headache is one of the most common physical symptoms of depression. And there's certainly the holiday blues or the winter blues that may have an emotional or psychological piece, stressors this time of year, or death in the family. Or it may have a very physical piece, and that is the drop in light exposure in some patients renders their brains much more likely to become depressed. So in December, we have the shortest day of the year on December 21st. So this begins the time, and usually late November and into December, where patients will start to experience more issues perhaps with depression and headache related to that when the light exposure, they're exposed to less light. So we can see then this time of year in either activation of a primary headache. So our question to someone is generally this: are you a headache sufferer? Are you typically a person who gets headaches, and therefore we would expect perhaps something triggering in them this time of year? Or is this something out of the ordinary for you? You're not particularly headache prone, but you're now getting them. We need to sort through what that might mean. But for the most part, we're talking about the first group, activation of a primary headache, those who have migraine and those who have tension-type headaches and experiencing more of them. So what could trigger more headaches? Well, stress. Stress is the #1 activator for either migraine or tension-type headache, and certainly there are a number of stressors. Those who were exposed to Black Friday, or was it Brown Thursday, I guess they call it now. The mall is not necessarily an unstressful place. Patients come into us also reporting they have family stressors at this time of year. They're seeing family members perhaps they don't want to, or they're traveling to a situation where they're not particularly comfortable. So stress is obviously very common. The family issues, holiday issues, financial ones this time of year as well, year-end concerns that abound for many people in the population. Dietary changes, there's a lot more chocolate, except maybe near Halloween or perhaps also in the spring near Easter. There may be certain pockets of time where chocolate is consumed heavily, but we get a lot of it this time of year, and a lot of different cheeses and chocolates and alcoholic beverages and strong caffeinated beverages. So we start to see other risk factors between nut roll and eggnog and things that I think almost anybody gets a headache from if they have enough of. So dietary changes, also very common. and maybe triggering, where patients come into us and say, you know, I get more headaches because I'm not usually eating, first of all, these things, or sometimes, secondly, this much. And that's out of the ordinary. And many headache patients find more headache activity when their situation is, quote, out of the ordinary. The third is schedule change. So travel this time of year, but even without travel, holidays, you know, you have time off. So you sleep in, or if you're traveling, you may not sleep enough, or you stay up all night on Christmas Eve putting, you know, Susie's dollhouse together, or a bike that you're trying to put together for the next day. You might find that there are schedule changes that occur. So often that they involve sleep, but it also may be meals. So while you're traveling, people don't hydrate as well when they're in the car, or they don't eat as frequently when they're on the plane. So schedule changes in sleep patterns, meal patterns, exercise patterns, hydration patterns can be problematic. And then finally, sensory overload. Lots of lights and noises and odors this time of year that may be different, and lots of scented candles, for example, and brightly lit trees, and those are types of things that in a sensitive individual can certainly provoke headache attacks. So some specifics about alcohol. Interestingly, it's been debated and somewhat controversial as exactly why alcohol triggers headaches, and there's no doubt that it does. There are basically two components to an alcohol-related headache. One is the alcohol-induced headache, which typically occurs within a few hours, 2 to 3 hours, of the intake of alcohol. And that's somebody who's sensitive to alcohol, typically more a migraine sufferer, who will experience the headache within a few hours. The other is a hangover headache, which can happen to anyone. Perhaps more prone are the headache patients, but it can happen to anybody, and that typically is the next day, right? So alcohol can trigger it either relatively immediately if you're sensitive, or the following day if you're one that maybe had too much. So is it alcohol itself? Well, it's unclear. It's certainly been the case that red wine, white wine, sparkling wine, spirits, beer, all can certainly trigger headaches. So it's not unique to red wine, although that tends to get the worst rap. But alcohol can do it, and in a variety of ways. Biogenic amines, these are natural substances found in a number of different foods, certainly in higher concentrations, interestingly, in things like aged cheeses. So tyramine is a substance that actually doesn't cross the blood-brain barrier. It doesn't get inside the brain, but and as mentioned, it's kind of more highly concentrated in certain meats, fermented foods, many condiments, figs, some fruits, plums, for example. I'm not sure about sugar plums, but certainly red plums have a lot of tyramine in them. So it's not certain that tyramine is the culprit, even though it's been blamed. Histamine, another substance that's very widely spread through a number of different foodstuffs. So aged cheeses, certain meats, and a lot of vegetables, some of which aren't really known to be major migraine triggers, like eggplant or spinach. All have significant concentrations of histamine, as does alcohol. But antihistamine treatments don't appear to prevent these headaches from occurring, so it's not clear that histamine is a factor. Sulfites get blamed a lot too, and people go for low sulfite alcohol. And in an occasional patient, the sulfite might be the factor. But like I mentioned with these other substances, sulfites are found in lots of things. Dried fruits, like raisins, very high in pickles or soy sauce. And although sulfites can trigger headache, it seems to be more of a respiratory phenomenon when there's a reaction to it, like a asthmatic type response. So not real clear that that's the case either. So the leading possibility seems to be these flavonoid phenols. These are compounds like tannins that are found as byproducts of alcohol fermentation. So the process of alcohol development, you can produce a number of substances, including acetone and acetaldehyde, these chemicals that probably are going to be more likely in triggering the headaches than the other things I've already mentioned. So what do we do finally with the solutions? Then we'll get on to our questions or comments. And what do we suggest to patients is, first of all, regulate your schedule. We do this all year round. We try to pay more attention to it because we do know you're going to be exposed to foods and stressors and alcohol, perhaps, that you're not the rest of the year. So it's even more important this time of year to regulate your sleep. Sleep the same number of hours, and avoid sleeping in on the holidays. Avoid napping on those days as well. Eat regularly 4 to 6 times a day. We'd be better off with kind of snacking through the day with small portions. And try to get adequate amounts of exercise, even if you travel. So get the, about a half an hour a day if you can get some form of modest aerobic exercise, as simple as a walk. Stress management, if you know you're going to head into a situation with the in-laws or the extended family or certain friends that are difficult situations for you, that it's important to manage stress, and that may be something as formal as biofeedback or as informal as prayer or meditation or something in between like yoga. So managing stress this time of year is something that, again, patients need to spend more time to devote to that. Alcohol moderation. So ideally, if you're alcohol sensitive, you probably want to avoid it altogether. But if it's a matter of amount, keep yourself to a glass or two. And you want to, for the most part, when taking in alcohol, double the amount of alcohol in volume with water between each alcohol exposure. So if you have 6 ounces of wine, you need to have at least 12 ounces of water before and after that glass. And moving forward through that day or the evening, the same thing. So you want to be doubling or quadrupling in that range the amount of alcohol with water. And in general, try to drink 60 ounces and maybe, if we can, up to 100 ounces in a day of water. And then finally, avoidance of sensory overload. If you know that it's an accumulation of all these things that gets to you, the last thing you want to do is spend the entire day at the mall. Spend too much time at the perfume counters or the candle stores when you're at the mall. To spend a day at the mall and then go to the IMAX theater. These are things that are, once you get home, after you finish shopping at the mall, go on the computer and shop another, several hours with that visual exposure to your screen. So to avoid the excess light and noise and smells that you may be exposed to over the course of the holiday season. So that's it. Those are kind of the remarks I wanted to make, and I think if anybody online now has specific comments or questions, we can get to those.
Thank you, Dr. Kaniecki. It looks like our first question comes from Ryan. She says the scent of freshly baked cookies, it brings on a migraine instantly. Are you familiar, or have you ever heard of this happening to anyone else?
Well, I'd have to say that the freshly baked cookies, you are, first of all, in a sad case. And secondly, one that is fairly unique. I've not heard that particular odor yet. I did have somebody today who reported one odor, and it was fried onions. Mine, I have 2, nail polish remover and pine cleaners. So pine scent and other things, it's different. There's a different scent maybe to an air freshener or even a tree in my house we grabbed over the weekend. So sometimes it's very, very specific. So this one woman today said fried onions. That's it. She can eat onions. It's not onions. It's the smell of fried onions. And I have another patient I remember very clearly who he and his wife came in, and his wife said it was the smell of cooked beef that she had difficulties with. And the husband was convinced. I don't even know if this chain exists any longer. No, but there's a chain of restaurants called Ponderosa, and they may still be in existence, but not around here, not in the Pittsburgh area that I'm aware of. And so, and he was convinced it's just that she did not like going to his favorite restaurant, which happened to be Ponderosa, because there was the smell of cooked beef. So, not certain, that whether how much validity there was to that, but I can tell you, you're not alone. There are many folks that will say it's not all smells, it's certain smells. It's not all perfumes, it's certain perfumes. And I'd have to say, this is the first time I've heard the smell of cookies, and I wonder if it would be across, like sugar cookies versus a chocolate cookie, for example, would it make a difference, or a raisin or oatmeal maybe? But if it's across the board, I do feel sorry for you because that's a great smell. So my condolences.
All right, our next question here is from Lisa. Could some of the holiday headaches be attributed to the letdown migraine phenomenon?
Yes, that's very, very common. So letdown migraine is where stress levels are high and then they tend to drop off. So we see that at any holiday, any vacation, or any weekend scenario. So one of the most common reasons for that is sleeping in. So when we see someone who goes from, let's just say a weekend, just give that as an example. So Friday, they have their schedule Monday to Friday. Saturday, they decide, oh, we're just going to sleep in. So the morning sleep in does a number of different things. One, you get more sleep than you're used to, not necessarily a good thing for headache people. Two, sometimes your breakfast is delayed. You go longer without some kind of caloric intake. And remember, we like to keep things regulated, including the blood sugar levels. So eating frequently is important. That can bring on a headache. Or you delay maybe your morning coffee and because you're not up at the same time, and that can bring on a headache. So the first thing we explore for in patients who have these, what we would think might be letdown migraines, are first a change in schedule. Did you have alcohol the night before on the weekend where you don't usually, or did you change your schedule on Saturday morning, Sunday morning, or in this case on the holiday? And if none of those is the case, people will say, no, keep my same schedule, don't have any alcohol because it bothers me. But still, I go from Friday to Saturday and I still get a headache. Or in this case, work time to work off time, and I still get a headache. So that's the true letdown phenomenon, where there's a certain level of stress that's kind of fairly high. And interestingly, it's not often stress or hormones that, we talk about those as two very common triggers of headache. It's not stress itself. It's not hormone levels themselves. It's the changes in stress level, either going up or going down. It's the changes in barometric pressure going up or going down. It's the changes in hormones that trigger headaches. So it's more that I think people, particularly migraine sufferers, are more sensitive to the change. And so if you have a change in stress, even though you might think it's for the better, having a lower stress weekend or a lower stress holiday, then that can bring on an attack. So our advice usually to people is to try to de-stress during the week as much as possible, or make your weekend or your holiday busier. So get up, do something physical first thing in the morning, maybe do some work of some sort or other, make the holiday a little bit, it doesn't have to be professional work. It can be housework. It could be physical activity. It could be church work, religious. It could be anything, but to get yourself busy on a weekend or a holiday, that might help mitigate some of these letdown headache attacks.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Robert. Have you or any of your patients tried the new headache hat?
Well, the headache hat, no, I have not, nor have any of the patients. Now, there's the crown, the Cephally kind of the crown that was released or approved by the FDA in the summer. So this is a device that's a stimulator, a neurostimulator, that's worn at the forehead and to the temples. And that I have tried at a meeting, not necessarily for treatment, because my migraines are fairly infrequent. And but I have a number of patients that have tried that device, and that neurostimulator it has been helpful for some that have tried it. So, but some of the cooling devices and the headache, the so-called headache hat, to date, I do not have necessarily good information to tell you what kind of results you might get, because not enough patients have tried it.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Alice. Would you recommend the same intake of water when drinking coffee or caffeinated beverages to balance your hydration?
That's wise, yes. It's in general, I did have a lady today that was drinking 100 ounces of water to balance out her 64 ounces of caffeine. And that wasn't quite working, so Caffeine still has a limit for most of us. We'd like to keep it under 100 milligrams total a day, certainly under 200 milligrams. I prefer it under 100. So that's, a strong cup of coffee or, a soft drink and a half, a 16-ounce soft drink or a 16-ounce tea. You'd like to keep it, for the most part, underneath 100 milligrams of caffeinated beverage exposure. So that, and we typically want patients drinking, so we're talking about 1 or 2 cups, let's say, of coffee, tea, whereas typically we want them drinking, for the most part, 6 to 8 cups of water on an ongoing basis anyway. So it's a lot more just due to the fact that, the ratio is different, mainly due to the fact that we're limiting the caffeine intake to, for the most part, 8 to 16 ounces anyway, where our water we'd like to see 60 ounces or sometimes even higher.
Thank you. Our next question from Lisa. Is the occurrence of holiday headaches statistically higher than other times of year? I'm sorry, the occurrence of headache over the holidays statistically higher than other times of the year?
Well, that's a good question. People have studied, what we do is we track our phone calls, and there are blips. So there are certain blips with, for example, weather fronts. So there's frequent blips that we get in our phone call with headache problems. So this is completely tracked every day, every week at our clinic, our headache center. And so we do see more on the holidays. We do see more near weather fronts on a smaller scale. But interestingly, our number one month for phone calls typically is October or November, and before we get to the December-January stretch. And it's because of weather change and season change, the combination of the two, we think. The days are getting shorter. We have lots of weather fronts with big dramatic swings in temperature here in the Pittsburgh area. So our worst months for phone calls are actually not December. December tends not, although we do see right around the holiday a bigger bump, the week or so around it. But for the most part, we'll get more phone calls in the month of October than we will in December year after year. And it has to do with the fact that I think for the most part, people are recognizing their holiday headaches. We have some good advice in hand and certainly give them recommendations that they often follow, whereas there's only so much you can do with the whole weather and season trigger that's occurring in the October-November time frame. So with that in mind, that's a lot harder to navigate because you just really have very little you can do, whereas in the holiday headache scenarios, a lot of our patients have the advice I'm giving you tonight, which really keeps, I think, our numbers down.
Thanks. Our next question, we have Ed. He says he suffered from migraines for 30 years and has much less headache avoiding turkey. Are you familiar with any specifics as to why this is the case?
No, there's not. I mean, of all the things that are out there, turkey's not high on the list. Turkey has in it building blocks for basically tryptophan, which are building blocks for serotonin, which we think is a good thing for headache. So, for the most part, theoretically, turkey would not have a lot of trouble. If it's fresh, it will likely be less. If it's smoked or aged, the smoking or aging, the processing of meat, particularly into cold cuts, for example, the more processed it is, the more likely it is to trigger. But for the if you really screen through different diets and different lists, turkey is not high on the list of perpetrators. It would probably be fairly low down. Poultry in general is, unless again it is aged or smoked. And when we look at all the lists, though, you basically get three things that don't seem to show up: lamb, and I just think people don't eat it very much; rice, and water. And just about any other food we've seen as be a potential trigger for a patient that's been reported or been given in one of the migraine diets. So if it isn't lamb, rice, or water, it's a possibility. So turkey certainly fits that bill right there, but not a big perpetrator for sure.
Our next question from Loren, or maybe Lauren. What about when alcohol is cooked? Well, I'm sorry, what about when alcohol is used to cook the food with? And the alcohol itself is cooked out. Will the remaining harmful ingredients also be cooked out, or are they still there?
Often they are. So you see the phenols can actually be cooked out or out, partially at least, from the substance that you're using the sauce in or on. So yes, you do see a reduction and therefore less likelihood of triggering an attack of headache. Not complete elimination, but significant reduction in a number of the substances I mentioned.
All right, well, it just looks like we're waiting on other questions to come in. I don't know if people are still typing. It looks like we got a couple of good ones off anyway.
They're cyber shopping while we're doing this, you know that. And multitasking and therefore giving themselves headaches.
All right, looks like here's one. Can colds and flus that people may get when traveling from the holidays trigger a primary headache?
Yes, not only can it do the secondary headaches, but patients will often tell us, their migraines are typically 1 or 2 days, but they're sick for a week or a week and a half with a headache that just won't break, and that's often triggered by a viral infection. So absolutely, not only can that do, infections can give headaches to non-headache people, but certainly can aggravate the underlying headache in somebody who's prone to them to begin with.
All right. Let's see. I don't see any more coming in.
I guess we have last
They're finding
call.
good deals.
Yeah.
Okay. The follow-up to that question is: so, are you saying that headaches we get from our colds can be worse than our usual ones?
Yes, they can be longer. So, if you're ill for a period of time, it can continue, because often, if you have a 24-hour virus, it's not going to be the case. But if you're ill for 3 or 4 days, let's say with something like a flu virus, boy, that can really throw the migraine for a tailspin. So in somebody who has a flu-related headache, maybe they have it for the 3 days they have the flu. For somebody who also has migraine, they might have an additional 3 or 4 days after that the headache continues. So whether it's being ill that sets it off, or being dehydrated, not eating as well, sleeping more because you're trying to sleep off. Remember, it throws your complete schedule out of whack, being ill like that. So it may be one of not the virus itself, but the repercussions of the virus, where it's altering your sleep patterns, your exercise patterns, how much you eat, how much you drink, and therefore those are things that can continue to drive the attack for days after the original, maybe even after the flu symptoms have stopped.
Thanks. So it looks like our next question is from Mary. If you're not able to tolerate all the water that you've recommended, do you have any other suggestions?
Well, there are some patients that can't because of, let's say, bladder issues, or our school teachers are notorious for not drinking because they can't get to the bathrooms. So if you can't because of volume, or just because of the amount of liquid that is, then that's difficult. You just have to pay attention as much as you can to the other steps like sleep, meal, exercise regulation. And if it's a matter, though, if you just can't drink water, which some people I've never had that problem, but there are those that just say, I just can't do it, don't like it. It makes me sick to drink the water, and so other non-caffeinated, non-artificially sweetened beverages. So alternatives could be things that, again, certain sports drinks that don't have, or certain flavorings that you can add to water, either one, that are not artificially sweetened that are not caffeinated are certainly alternatives if it's a matter of taste. But if it's a matter of volume, there's really not a lot you can do about that except pay more attention to the other natural steps in controlling migraines.
Our next question is from Deborah. Doesn't sleeping off a headache sometimes work? And then does that mess up your sleep schedule to produce even more headaches?
It can be yes and yes. So typically we prefer to say, unless it's your normal sleep time, try not to sleep it off. Now, kids don't run into this much trouble. Sometimes kids can nap it off. I'm talking mainly about adults. And the kids don't seem to have the repercussion of napping off a headache and having more headaches follow. But as adults, a nap or going to bed earlier may be counterproductive at times. So it all depends on the individual. Some get away with it now and again. We certainly don't want that done regularly. But our advice usually is, let's look at another way to control the headache rather than using sleep as a matter of treatment, because that, when overdone, just like taking pain relievers, too much of a good thing gets to be a bad thing, and the same thing can be with sleep when it's used to treat an attack as well, so, or attacks in general. So yes, try to find other means of doing it. Again, going to bed a little bit earlier now and again, not going to be a big deal. And in children, I don't really find this to be problematic, but for adults, we should try to find other options if these are headaches that are occurring in the midday.
Thanks. Our next question. Do you have any polite suggestions on a way to approach the people that invite you to a dinner party and you're not able to eat everything they prepared because you do need to bring some food from home to supplement the items you can't eat? Many times people are offended. Any suggestions on how to avoid that conversation?
Well, that's a delicate one to have. If you say, we have to, it's a matter of saying, in fact, that's how I know patients broach it is, listen, I don't want to offend you by this, but the last thing I want to do is have you worry about, a reaction to a food that I might be sensitive to. So, if you don't mind, this is something that, I've brought with me. What you can also do is certainly eat before and after you go, unless you plan to be there all day. So not necessarily bringing your own things, but just saying that, listen, I have significant dietary restrictions. Don't worry about me tonight. I'm happy to sit at the table with everybody. I might grab a thing here or there, but don't mind me. I just have to watch what I'm doing here because of the potential for a reaction. Now, some people have true allergies. For example, you don't have to be delicate in a situation of a peanut allergy. And I think most people are aware of that. So when you use the term of significant sensitivities or allergies to foods, I think those that are hosting you are open to that and obviously don't want you to become ill. They don't want you to have any problems because they're bringing you. You're their guest. So it's just a matter of suggesting, you know what, I had something that come before I eat before I came. As I said, don't worry about me. I'll sort through what I can and can't. But I just wanted to let you know in advance. Don't be offended. It's not your cooking. It's not what you're bringing here. It's just I have certain allergies, food allergies and sensitivities that I don't want to complicate your life and creating a diet just for me, or a plate just for me. I'll keep an eye on what things I can and can't eat, and just don't feel bad about it. So I think that's usually the best way to handle it. And then if you use the term allergies, it's not you're sensitive, or you're being sensitive to the host or the chef and saying, I appreciate what you're doing. It's just I just can't be exposed to certain substances or certain foods, so therefore I've taken these steps.
Sounds good. Our next question, do you recommend your chronic migraine patients take a yearly flu shot? I took a flu shot this year, and it seemed to trigger one of the worst migraine episodes I've had in over a year. I had to finally get a steroid pack to break the cycle. It could have been something else that triggered it, but it happened within a day of me getting the flu shot.
The flu shots vary so much from year to year, so my answer to patients is yes, get it done. There is an occasional patient who will get a flare from it, but the flare with the flu itself is so much more problematic, and it's so much more likely that most people with migraine that get the flu are going to have trouble. only a few that have migraine and they get the flu shot will have trouble. So the odds of the flu shot are much less, and there are so many good reasons to get the flu shot. So yes, no restrictions whatsoever. I encourage all our migraine people to get it, year after year. And as I said, 1 year they might get the headache, and another year not, because the vaccines do vary from year to year.
All right, it looks like that was our last question of the evening. Dr. Kaniecki, I'd like to thank you for joining us this evening, taking time out of your busy schedule to answer a couple of questions for the headache community.
Well, I'm going to go get something to drink, go to the mall, shop, and see what I can do, stirring up one of my own headaches here. Everybody have a good night. Thanks for joining us.
You too.